Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious? Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for August 6, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for a conversation that I think is going to be really interesting. Brendan, we are talking about Vera Drew's film, The People's Joker, which got a release earlier in the year.
I think it was April around that time.
It was April, I believe. But it was a little bit of a smaller release, and then it trickled onto VOD here recently. I never got this film in my area, or if I did, it was not for very long and in a theater I really couldn't get to. So
I didn't see it in my area either, and it's one that you and I were hunting down for quite some time.
For it, I heard
we had
so many great things about it.
Yeah, quite a few colleagues of ours that love the film. I've seen a lot of 4.5 out of 5-star ratings on Letterboxd for people I follow, and it just kept almost like it just kept poking the bear. Like hey, we've seen this, you don't have it yet, you have to wait. And well, we finally have it on VOD, as you said, and I do think it is one worth talking about, as you said too.
Absolutely. And it's a film that's interesting, not just for its content and its ideas and how it executes on those ideas.
Yeah.
But it's distinctive because of some of the surrounding legal issues or potential legal issues surrounding this film, because it is a movie that is, for reasons we'll talk about, it is, of course, titled The People's Joker. It utilizes Batman lore quite heavily, and Warner Brothers was not a fan. They did not approve. So
apparently, what do they see this as, an adaptation of their property or something like that?
Well, I guess just to back up slightly, this film premiered at TIFF in 2022. So to give some context there as to the long road it's been on to get to wider distribution. It premieres at TIFF, but very limited. I think it had a Midnight Madness premiere, but because of threats from Warner Brothers, they had to pull any other screenings that it had planned. And it sat on the shelf for a while until, for whatever reasons, they were able to finally get this to audiences in a non-festival format. And you get that very early on. The opening title card is 6 paragraphs. It's like reading a legal document.
It's hilarious. It's not.
This
It's
film
almost
is a parody. It's not a Warner Brothers approved thing.
And Vera Drew herself apparently had to say those very things as those legal issues were going on. I think she even went as far as to say, this is closer to Scary Movie than anything else. It's not meant to be in conjunction with what Warner Brothers and DC already own and what they're already distributing. It's funny. We'll talk about it further. It's not related to those films, and yet it also kind of is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly the irony of it. I look forward to having that conversation, which is a little bit of an interesting spot if you're Warner Brothers. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the rabbit hole here, but I don't want to dive into its legal issues when we actually start getting into the review.
Yeah.
But if you're a Warner Brothers executive and you come into this film in good faith and you watch it, yes, it is acting as a parody, but again, for reasons we'll talk about, there is an earnestness to it that would give you pause as to the film's actual intent. And that is somewhat of the brilliance of the movie.
It has an idea. It has I don't want to say agenda, but it does have a goal. And whether that goal is tied to Warner Brothers and their output is, I mean, that's not subtle. It's not tied to that at all. It has
No.
it's utilizing this lore for a very particular message that we've never seen these films or these comics really talk about at all.
Yeah.
It's a new interpretation that we'll talk about here. Yeah.
And that is so vivid in the film and so distinctive that, to Vera Drew's point, you're not going to confuse it with anything relating to Warner Brothers.
No.
So I don't think Warner Brothers needs to be all that concerned in the end.
It's honestly hilarious that these legal issues even exist in the first place.
Absolutely. At any rate, I'm very much looking forward to talking about this film, The People's Joker, directed by Vera Drew and starring Vera Drew, as well as Lynn Downey, Christian Calloway, Griffin Kramer, Kane Disler, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. And by a bunch, I genuinely mean a bunch of characters.
There's a lot. There's a lot.
Come and go throughout this film.
Sometimes hard to keep track of, but there's a lot.
Yes. If you're not familiar with The People's Joker, it is about an inspiring clown grappling with her gender identity as she combats a fascist caped crusader. There are certainly aspects to that Warner Brothers would also not approve of, perhaps understandably. However, for reasons we'll get into, I think it's pretty great here. Brendan, what did you think about The People's Joker?
These are where these legal issues, again, I just find it hilarious because it just shows that if Warner Brothers were truly upset by the connectivity that this film has with their world and their property, it just proves how much they miss the intent and how they miss the memo. Because it is obviously pulling from some of their work, sometimes even line by line. It's narratively referencing Todd Phillips's Joker in a lot of ways. There is clearly inspiration taken from Tim Burton's Batman. There's actually a lot more inspiration taken from Joel Schumacher's version of these films. Batman Forever and Batman and Robin are all over it's all over this in some ways.
Yeah.
There's even a tribute to Joel Schumacher himself in the beginning of this movie. I kind of get that Warner Brothers would notice those things, but they're missing the intent that it's honestly kind of brilliant that we're basically taking this existing intellectual property and using it to frame it as a queer coming of age story. I find that really intriguing and honestly kind of brilliant in a way that I'm surprised it was never done before, but also I'm not surprised that it wasn't done before. In a weird way, it's sort of suggesting the obvious queerness that may have always been within these comics, within this lore. And I think that's a really interesting notion, and it makes for one of the most, if not the most inventive movie of the year, and just goes to show what you can get away with when you can make a film on the cheap. This film is made on the cheap. You could tell just based on how it looks. And I think that's what makes it all the more intriguing and visually stimulating. I really found this film engaging, and I love the sleight of hand in using this existing lore for this story of transgender recognition. I found that really fascinating because it weirdly fits this world. The gender reversal of not just the Joker, but some of these other characters weirdly makes sense in the lore that we already know. I just found that notion in and of itself really intriguing.
Yeah, you said it, and I completely agree. This is one of the most inventive films of not just this year, but in recent years. The way it embodies both parody and pastiche as it relates to Batman lore to tell this coming-of-age story is nothing short of sublime. It is really funny, it's honest, it's vulnerable, it's really poignant. The comic book and movie references on display here are deeply inspired. I mean, the personal dedication and the opening text alone is incredible, as we see this film is dedicated to Vera Drew's mom and Joel Schumacher. I mean,
I love that.
So good.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what makes this film not just entertaining, but thoroughly distinctive because it would have been real easy to use any IP really as a cipher to cynically parallel to societal structures that try to eliminate emotional freedom from certain people. But this film doesn't do that at all. Perhaps there is some irony in it, given that Warner Brothers did try to silence the film initially, and they still haven't given their approval officially. But this film isn't a takedown of Batman or Warner Brothers. If anything, to everything Brendan said, it's the antithesis of that. Instead, it simply uses Batman iconography to tell Drew's story as a trans woman and underground and being an underground comedian. There's especially a deep reverence for Batman Forever, given the images of Nicole Kidman and Val Kilmer that we see early on.
The Riddler as well, who actually sports the actual Batman Forever logo, the question mark around the bat symbol. It's not on the nose. It's on the nose for sure. It's not subtle.
Exactly. Or how she calls herself Joker, the Harley Quinn throughout this film. And she really is an amalgamation of those two characters. We'll certainly talk about that more as we go, but the film's parody pastiche approach is really brilliant, I think.
Yeah.
It's also very fascinating as a visual experience. As you were talking about, the early 2000s, early internet bad green screen effect gives the film a personality that I really did appreciate. It amplifies the film's humor. It couples well with its animation and other live action tricks that we see here. Maybe some of that is budget or the lack thereof, but Drew takes full advantage of every tool that she is given to mock a Gotham City that I found utterly entrancing, especially given these characters, how they are rendered here, the performances that make them who they are. Drew's performance in particular is really great.
So committed. Committed.
There's a lot to love with this film.
Yeah, and you use the word mock when talking about the film and some of the executional details here, which I think is a good word for it. But the big difference and why I think it's silly that Warner Brothers is sort of pushing back on this movie is while there is a mockery happening here, Drew clearly still loves Batman. She still loves the lore of Batman, the mythology of Batman, and is simply using it as a lens to tell this particular story. That, like I said, it weirdly makes sense. It weirdly has a place. This world of superheroes and freaks, it kind of makes sense for this particular queer story. And
there's a sincerity to it. It's parody, but there's an earnestness to how she feels about Batman lore in terms of being able to creatively tell her story.
Yeah, and I do like the way she's also simultaneously flipping the script, almost like this weird bait and switch of sorts. So she does develop this relationship with Jason Todd, played by Kane Disler, and in this version of the character, Jason Todd is also a transgender male, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a very particular kind of relationship here, which is also really interesting. But in comic lore, Jason Todd was once Robin and would eventually become Red Hood, that I think also became another iteration of the Joker. And in this movie, Jason Todd is depicted in a similar way as Jared Leto's Joker from Suicide Squad. So in a weird way, while you're right that Drew as Joker the Harley Quinn embodies both those characters, there's a moment where I thought, okay, maybe she's really more of the Harley Quinn here, and Jason Todd is really more of the Joker figure, and yet they kind of go back and forth in those personas. I think that's what's so interesting in how she's playing with lore, but doing so in a way that actually has not just conviction, but a very specific point. And I love the way she plays with that, because it clearly still feels like I want to say an honoring, but there is respect still given to the Batman ethos and the Batman mythology. It doesn't hate this world, which I appreciate.
No, I completely agree. I think what's so fascinating about the relationship of Joker, the Harley Quinn, and Jason Todd Joker here is that, as you're talking about, Joker evokes the Jared Leto Joker aesthetically. Yeah. But in context of the film, He's also trans and deeply
Yeah.
troubled because of his own past relationships, a reveal that comes later on in the film. And it is certainly something to see as that unfolds. Again, in terms of parody, pastiche, earnestness, their relationship is both familiar and unique and invigorating. The toxicity and blatant emotional manipulation by the Joker evokes the traditional Joker ethos we're all familiar with, but Drew comments on and makes fun of how thinly veiled those tropes might be, and it serves her character in the process as it becomes as she becomes more confident in her identity.
Yeah.
And I find that really fascinating, and because the film does deconstruct what the Jokerification process could look like. As the film unfolds, we see Joker the Harley Quinn, her journey, her Jokerification manifest in this incredibly subversive way where she becomes more confident and emboldened in her identity.
Yeah.
She, of course, has the manic cackle and displays the physicality with exuberant precision, but mentally and emotionally, there's a maturity to her in the end you don't often associate with the Joker. But because of who she is and how she would be seen, there's still an outcast sensibility to her that Drew manipulates perfect in her storytelling. It's really incredible how that comes about.
It's not all fun and games. There is a sincerity there. I especially appreciated the relationship that Vera Drew has with Lynn Downey, who plays Joker, the Harley Quinn's mother here. And while some of those narrative tropes may be, I don't want to say obvious, but they're certainly story tropes we've seen in movies like this before. But weirdly, it has a place in giving a proper villainous backstory of sorts to Joker the Harley Quinn here. And I think the way that some of those relationships crystallize are pretty tender on it, honestly. I found that pretty surprising, especially by the end, as Joker the Harley Quinn, she let's just say she finds herself within a more metaphysical realm by the film's third act. I don't want to get too much into it, but there's a certain realization that happens in that new dimensional space of accepting that you cannot find validation from outsiders. That it's all about that internalized thing. That I did find really touching. It's hard to find a balance with any movie to have this type of level of mockery and yet still feel as sincere as it does. And I think the balancing act is surprisingly efficient here, especially for this kind of independent film that's made on the cheap like it is. There's a clear vision here that never wavers and is completely consistent throughout.
Yeah, it's really hard to get into all of the details. One, you don't want to spoil all of the reveals and the references we get throughout the film, but also there are so many you can't keep track of them all.
There's a lot.
There
are lines of dialogue ripped from other Batman movies many times.
Yeah. I mean, this is a movie that is deeply intertwined with Batman lore going back decades and decades and decades, whether it be the comics, the 60s TV show, all of the movies that we've seen throughout the years. I mean, this film references all of them, and every character that you could possibly think of that is involved with Batman pops up in one way or another in this film. And
not even Batman. Saturday Night Live is referenced in this film.
Yes, I mean, it's kind of a big plot point in this film. Yeah. Like the comedy or anti-comedy, as it's talked about here, is hilarious. But that's ultimately what I'm trying to get at, is that while there is this parody pastiche element of the film, and there's certainly laughs to be had with that alone, the references and the Batman iconography, it is handled with diligence. Again, it's not necessarily making fun of those things. as much as it's utilizing it to tell Vera Drew's story. And what is that? It's her coming of age, realizing who she is, what her identity is as a trans woman. And it's also, circling it back to the comedy, a commentary on how she views the comedic scene. The idea that she even has to establish an anti-comedy club, I think.
Oh yeah,
is
where
really
her
hilarious.
where her most comedic bit is simply laughing at the saddest stories of other people. Like,
Exactly.
that's her routine.
A very Joker thing to do. But that is
Yeah.
a really great example
Yeah.
of this film using Joker ethos, something as disturbing as that, to comment on what Vera Drew wants to talk about as it relates to either her coming of age or how she views the entertainment business. But this is a cipher for Drew to unveil her frustrations with the comedy scene, whether it be the volatility of climbing the social ladder, the prices of comedy classes, the disappointments that come with something like Saturday Night Live, which in this film it's called UCB, but it's the same thing essentially.
It is.
She
Lorne
jokes-
Michaels is in this movie.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
She also jokes a lot about dating comedians. In fact, she states directly that you shouldn't date comedians, and how all of that is funneled through the litany of Batman references and all of the lore that we see here. I just think is really clever and really fantastic. Again, I don't want to reveal all of them for the sake of spoilers, and also I couldn't write them all down. Like it just they all happen so fast.
I wrote down a few.
Yes,
but
same here, but like,
but weirdly, I'm with you. I don't want to give away too many of them, if any of them. But weirdly,
I could give you maybe a dozen, and that barely scratches the surface here.
Oh, you're right. You're right. But weirdly, I think the quote unquote references that stuck out to me the most, that I appreciated the most, are when Vera Drew utilizes existing lore and twists them for her own narrative purpose.
Exactly.
So we do get the Joker origin story in this movie again, like we've seen many times before. But in this case, it's commented on that the vat of chemicals, it's filled with feminizing hormones. So the way it twists it for its own gain, I think,
purposes.
It's fascinating. And those are the moments that I thought were the most insightful, as far as trying to take something that we already knew but twist it for its own gain. Yet at the same time, I still got a bit of a chuckle when a direct line from Batman Forever was uttered. Maybe more for nostalgic reasons, but I still chuckled when I heard it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's very funny. And circling back to that moment you were talking about, when she falls into the chemicals and she recontextualizes it for her own purpose.
Yeah.
Immediately following that, continuing that train of thought, is when we get the reveal of Jason Todd, his story as Joker and his past relationships, one in particular with a Caped Crusader that you will very much recognize the moment you see him. and I love how it's rendered visually, because Vera Drew isn't going to cast someone to play that character, so she is very creative about how that character comes about in this film. But the backstory of that character is unlike anything you've ever seen. And again, to your point, bending Batman lore and iconography to serve her own purposes and to tell her own story. And it's fascinating.
Turning Jason Todd, this other mirroring of the Joker, into what I think she calls a 90-pound trans dude as a narcissistic abuser. That in and of itself is a pretty daring notion for a film like this, taking a person that could have been seen as a victim and still is, but also as kind of a villainous presence, straddling that line in both ways, which I think is I think that's a very daring thing to do for a character like that in a movie like this. And I love that she's willing to challenge that. She challenges certain things, like, let's say, Saturday Night Live in this movie, or UCB, as you said, acknowledging the need for a diverse cast, she doesn't acknowledge that positively. She kind of scoffs at that. So maybe in a meta and an almost realistic way, how certain media outlets would go about and do those things, but maybe it didn't feel genuine. It was only out of political necessity. And there's that recognition of some realism there that I think is really effective too.
Yeah, the whole UCB thing that you're talking about there is something I was thinking about when we were talking earlier about how this film utilizes the Jokerification of these characters, particularly with Joker, the Harley Quinn herself, and how she becomes emboldened in her identity by the end. There's certainly an evolution to get there, but there comes a moment in the third act of the film when her Jokerification manifests in that subversive way we were talking about. She becomes confident. She has the cackle. She has the physicality.
Yeah.
There's this sophisticated maturity to the character you don't often associate with the Joker, but she's still this outcast. And how does that come through in this film? Well, it's the UCB finally accepting her, giving her a role, but she has to drop the Joker persona.
Yeah, there's a but.
Only way for her
there's
to.
There's a but. There's a manipulation happening there to foster UCB's own sociopolitical presence in the wrong ways.
Yeah, we think you might be funny, but not as a trans woman. Is essentially the message there. So yeah, I mean, again, it's not always subtle. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't, as in that case. But that, I think, is certainly the point that Vera Drew is trying to make, that even when she came to terms with her identity, she's still very much an outcast. And she has to bend to the rules of the corporification around her because there's still a taboo.
Yeah.
And like, again, how that is visually rendered here is it's really something to watch.
It's really interesting. And we talk about the film visually. We should also know, or at least acknowledge, a good chunk of this movie is animated.
It is.
This is partially an animated movie in many ways. I think,
or there's live action tricks, such as using like toys, like action figure toys.
I love that scene. I love that moment so much.
It's so good. But yeah,
it weirdly brought me back to my childhood, and I can't necessarily relate to this material.
I love that. I mean, that's the brilliance of this film, I think, is like, look, we can't cast real people, or we can't physically pull off this action. We don't have the budget to do this, but we can mock up a building and use action figures to do the things.
That weirdly makes it better. Like,
I love it. It gives the
that.
film a personality. I agree.
Yeah.
And it's also worth noting that Drew did commission hundreds of artists to pull this off. Yeah. There is lots of animation. There's lots of CG. But she brought in a lot of underground artists to make this happen. This is a film about outsiders made by outsiders, and it gives the film this incredible uniqueness that you just won't see anywhere else. Like the world they create here feels unpredictable. It's very strange, and I love that about the experience.
Yeah, and it is also quite funny at times. You know, we talked about that a little bit. We didn't really reference any particular moments of humor that really stuck out for us, but it's a pretty bitingly funny movie at times. I think the one moment that made me laugh the most, so I mentioned earlier Joker's relationship with her mother and the tension that comes about there. There's a moment where Joker's mother surprisingly shows up in Gotham City, and it's her attempting to see Joker's perspective through her eyes in a pretty sweet way. But the first thing she says when she sees her is, "Oh, you look different." And she shows up in her full Joker getup. I don't know, just like the deadpan delivery of Lynn Downey's performance there, I thought was pretty much pitch perfect. And that was, but there are a lot of moments like that throughout the film.
No, I completely agree. I really liked all of the stuff with the penguin. Made me laugh as well.
Oh yeah, Nathan Faustin, I believe the actor's name is. Pretty good performances all around, given the fact that they are masked by so much cheap visual inventiveness that it's but performances are still able to come through.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love the abrasive quality of the penguin. There's a realness to his approach to Joker the Harley Quinn. Like they just have a really great dynamic that I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
And as we wind down here, just to give you a little bit of the scope in terms of Batman lore and how much of it we see here. These are all of the characters that we see in this film in one way or another. And I'm not going to get to all of them, but I'm going to name a bunch of them. Of course, there's Joker, the Penguin, Ra's al Ghul, Batman, Dr. Jonathan Crane, the Riddler, Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, Bob the Goon, Bane. Who else we got here? The Huntress.
Yeah.
Clark Kent, Lois Lane. Just to give a few examples. And then there's also Perry White, this belligerent Alex Jones style personality that you see throughout the film as well. Lorne Michaels, literally Lorne Michaels is in the film. Not himself, but someone playing
Lorne. The character of Lorne Michaels is in this movie. Yeah.
But I just love that they don't tiptoe around that at all. Like just Lord Michaels. That's the name of the character.
I actually did not expect that. I knew that this was pulling at least inspiration from real Batman mythology and lore.
Yeah.
But I did not realize it was this direct and pulling these things as literally as it was. Well, maybe literally is not the right word because it isn't an adaptation of these characters or anything like that. Like Vera Drew said, she acknowledged that this is basically Scary Movie, but as a queer coming of age tale. It's that same level of parody that she was apparently going for. And if we see it as that, then I think you can accept it as that. I think that is a really intriguing way of making any kind of movie. That's a really inventive thing.
I agree. Yeah. So like, I love that about this film. It's very creative. It's funny and it utilizes Batman mythology in a way that you might not expect, especially when the film labels itself a parody. And it is, but I would say though that it's very different than a lot of parodies, a scary movie, if you will.
Yeah.
In the sense that there is a lot of sincerity and reverence toward these characters and the lore that it's utilizing.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is reshaping a lot of that to tell its own story that I think is incredible here. It all works very, very seamlessly.
It's so intriguing. Such an intriguing film. Might not be for everybody, but it's such an intriguing film, I thought.
Yeah. And also shout out to Vera Drew, not just as a filmmaker and editor. I know she edited this film as well. That's, I believe, how she got her start. She's an editor and and with a lot of the stuff that she's done.
Yeah.
But really good as an on-screen performer. Like loved her performance.
Very magnetic. Yeah, very magnetic for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So yeah, just really great all around. I encourage people to check this out. This is available to get on demand. You can rent this on demand, and I don't think it's terribly long. What, like 90 minutes maybe?
It's about 90 minutes. Yeah, it's a pretty brief film.
So it's a brief watch. Yeah. Very good. Definitely encourage people to check it out. I really quite loved it. Any final thoughts, Brendan? Anything else you want to add?
Well, it is a very smart movie. We have to acknowledge that as well. There's an analogy towards the end around clownfish that I thought was pretty brilliant. Appropriately so. But given, I think the line of dialogue is how, factually speaking, that clownfish are female dominant as the dominant species.
Yes.
And I think it was Ra's al Ghul that says they know that identity is not fixed. Kind of the thematic summation of the movie, but using clownfish as symbolism for that, I thought was weirdly brilliant. If I'm being honest.
Yeah,
so there are strokes of brilliance here.
I completely agree. I mean, what is comic books? It's
Mm-hmm.
about these characters that are often hidden in masks.
Yeah.
Their characters discovering their identity, sometimes double identities. It's about them finding purpose. That's exactly what this film is about. I
Yeah.
don't know if this film could have utilized anything else more perfectly than superhero lore, in this case, Batman lore, to tell a story about a woman going through that exact same journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, very smart, brilliant film. I really liked it quite a bit. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, you can of course leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment on social media. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can reach out to us on social, letterbox. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. Quickly, just want to note we have a review of Trap, M. Night Shyamalan's Trap.
We
is
do.
available. You can go and check that out. On the main show this week, we did a consensus ranking between Brendan and I of M. Night Shyamalan. That was a ton of fun. And I guess speaking of comic books, we also talked about Marvel and D23, which is, when this episode is released, the day this is released, D23 is tomorrow. And we don't know what's going to happen.
We might get absolutely nothing.
We might get nothing. Who knows? We might get absolutely nothing. But we did talk about what we think could be revealed at D23.
Yeah.
That was a big part of the main show this last week as well, if you want to go and check that out. We'll, of course, on next week's show, we'll talk about D23 and what is actually revealed. And to Brennan's point, it might not be anything.
It might not be.
It could all be pointless. So we'll see. We'll certainly see. But
we'll see.
A little bit of a tie-in there.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also a new Women in Session out this week that was really great. And coming very soon, we'll have a new Chasing the Gold episode.
Yep.
Very busy week, but we do hope that you check all of that out as well. Hope that you enjoyed this episode. Brendan, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here for this show?
Well, while we already are a day or depending on when this goes out, it'll be post your birthday. But once again, happy birthday.
It'll be afterwards.
Yeah, but
appreciate
happy birthday.
Yeah, appreciate it. Because we are recording this before my birthday, but the episode
That's where the
will be
timing is
released
confusing me a
afterwards.
little bit. It's because I know your birthday is the 7th, and when this goes live, it'll be a different date than that.
Absolutely. So I have no idea how it went, but I'm gonna say it was great. I hope that
You're turning
it is
39, so of
anyway.
course it went great.
Yeah. I hope that it's great. I do know this weekend is when we're going to actually be celebrating because my birthday is obviously on a Wednesday if you're doing the math there.
Yeah, of course.
So,
you celebrate on a weekend. Who celebrates on a Tuesday or a Wednesday?
Yeah, I'm not going to do too much on a Wednesday when I got two kids running around keeping me busy all the time.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
And I have to wake up for work on Thursday. So, I'm not going to be doing too much. But yeah, we're going to celebrate this weekend. We have some fun. Gonna have a cookout.
Good stuff.
Invite some friends
man.
over. It'll be good.
Maybe I'll fly down.
Yeah, absolutely. With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. People's Joker. Good stuff.
Very
Go watch it.
Yeah.